you could say that he kind of represented everything that Percy hated, the privilege of aristocracy. All right, so Percy Shelley was a poet and a radical anarchist. Like I say, he wrote The Mask of Anarchy, and the other work he did that was famous was called Prometheus Unbound. Prometheus Unbound was a rework of a Greek myth. In the myth, Prometheus steals fire from the gods, which is representative of knowledge, and gives it to humans. And Prometheus created humans out of clay in the story. In the end of the story of the original, Prometheus is punished by Zeus by being strapped to a table, and every day an eagle would peck out his liver, and then his liver would regrow, and he was punished for eternity. In Percy's rework, it turns out to be more positive. Prometheus is saved by saved by Hercules, and then Zeus is overthrown. And he's very overt in his message of the political meanings of it, right? He was very much like fight the power, fight the institutions. He was against, the state and religious institutions. And so the story of his version of Prometheus was to show that you can have, in order for a revolutionary society, that needs to have peaceful foundations. And this was directly drawn from the experience of the French revolutions, right? So the French revolutions were a cycle of replacing one dictator and putting in another, and it became a tyranny of the majority, and just mass beheadings in the street, and so that was a revolution that really didn't turn out well, right? So Shelley was saying that in order to have a successful revolution, it needs to be based on nonviolence and love. And so in the end of Prometheus Unbound, it just turns into like a anarchist paradise. And so in fact, the world becomes, the story is a championing of free will, goodness, and hope, and all that idealistic stuff. All right, so Mary Shelley's father was William Godwin, and he was the original anarchist. He was a very radical political philosopher. He was a utilitarian, right? So following the tradition of like Jeremy Bentham, the idea that everything we should do should be for the greatest amount of good, the most amount of happiness for with the least amount of pain and all that kind of stuff, right? So that unfortunately led him to the idea of voluntary communism, because he thought that if someone had wealth and someone else needed it, really everything should be shared, but voluntary, right? He was individualist in most rights, in most regards, and he opposed the state forcing redistribution, but it wasn't perfect. He wrote his famous tract on political philosophy, which is called Political Justice. He wrote in 1793. He was inspired by Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man, which was written a couple years earlier. And then he wrote another play, 1794, called Things as They Are, which was a novel calling an end to tyrannical government. So his daughter, Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, she wrote Frankenstein when she was just 19, and was published when she was 21 in 1818. And she was also an individualist anarchist, and her mother was a feminist, and so she was too. Individualist feminist, though, right? Not the collectivist feminist. That's important. Her mother died 10 days after Mary's birth, though, complications from giving birth. So she never really got to know her mother, but her mother published a famous work on her ideas. So she was very much influenced by her mother, and very influenced and very close to her father, William Godwin. And so she became a prolific author as well, and incorporated those ideas into her own writings. And then I have a picture of, the four people I just discussed, so you can kind of see the relationship, parent, son, daughter, husband, wife, everything, right? All right, so in case we're kind of rusty on the plot of Frankenstein, I'll quickly review the story, right? So Victor Frankenstein is a scientist who creates an unnamed monster by sewing together a hodgepodge of cadaver parts, and he harnesses lightning to give the spark of life to the monster, right? His creation was meant to be beautiful, but it turned out hideous. And after it became alive, he was so frightened by it that he ran away and fell ill just from the stress. So he ran away for like 4 months. And while he was away, the monster learned to talk and write, and he ended up killing Victor's brother, though. His brother was criticizing the monster for being so ugly, and the monster was just trying to like silence him, like, shh, quiet, don't criticize me. Ended up killing him by accident, right? Because he was like 8 feet tall, freak, muscle bound. So it was an accident, but he killed him. And so what he ended up doing was framing William's nanny. Her name was Justine, placing his locket next to her. And so the town people who were unaware of the monster, of course, believed that she had killed him. So she was hanged. And that was right at the time that Victor Frankenstein had returned. So he finds out his brother was killed, and he knew the monster had to do something with it. And he knew that Justine was unrightfully being hanged, but there was nothing he could do. There's no way he could convince people of the truth. And so the monster demands Victor creates a mate for him. And he starts going along with it, because the monster promised that they'll run away to the Amazon jungle and leave him alone. But it turns out that Victor thinks about it and realizes this could be a disaster. Maybe they'll start mating and create this terrible breed of monsters or whatever. So he thinks about the consequences and aborts the plan. And this irritates the monster. So the monster kills Victor's friend, Clerval. And Victor gets blamed for this death too, and so he gets imprisoned. So eventually he's acquitted, and this time, he's vowed to kill the monster, right? So what he does is, and at the same time, the monster kills his wife when he gets out of jail. And so there's so much, tragic death and stuff, right? So Victor is hunting the monster, and he dies in the process. He falls into the Arctic Ocean and gets hypothermia and dies. But he's telling his story to a captain that finds him and everything, right? So that's what happens. The monster, in the end, ends up indirectly killing his own creator, and the monster feels remorse for all of the murders he's guilty for, and vows to immolate himself. He's going to burn himself on a funeral pyre. And that's the end of the story. So there's very tragic ending. So the takeaway here is the subtitle of Frankenstein. A lot of people think Frankenstein is the name of the monster, but Frankenstein is the scientist, and the monster didn't have a name. The subtitle of Frankenstein is called The Modern Prometheus. And so Victor is the modern Prometheus, because he's trying to deal with knowledge. He's stealing knowledge. He's trying to, he has the hubris to think that he can control something unnatural, right? And so he ends up getting punished by his own creation. So in the original Prometheus, Prometheus is punished for dabbling in things he shouldn't have. And so the Frankenstein is an allegory of the state, and especially overtly about the French revolutions, in that we create it, and we think we're having a representative democracy, but it turns on us, and it becomes the master, right? And so if you think about the story of Frankenstein and the monster as being the state, it actually starts to make sense. For example, it's a patchwork of conflicting components, and it has the mind of a killer, right? So maybe it has the heart of a saint, the mind of a killer. If you think about the state has all these different organizations and departments, and you know, it might have welfare and it might mean well, but you can't have that without it having a military complex. And so you can't support the whole thing because really it's going to be self-interested and have resort to violence. And the monster blames its actions and murders and violently suppresses criticism. Governments do this all the time. The monster demands that it has a bride, which is, you could say, like state expansion. And the monster says, "You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey." And so this is definitely true. The state, defendants of the state try to say, that, you know, the government is us and everything. We elect, you know, and representative democracy and all this stuff. But no, we become the slaves. So that's the story of Frankenstein, and I hope I made the case that Frankenstein is actually an allegory of the state and how we think we can control the state, but it becomes the master. Thanks. Oh, next we're going to do reach your neighbor. So if you have any new people, maybe last time you didn't get around to introducing yourselves, now's a good time to say hi. We'll do it for about 5 minutes.
It's not very sunny out there.
Hello again. Yeah, it's not something you learn in school.
Good to see you again.
You're after I graduated.
It's a cool photo there.
For 3 years. Yeah, definitely. Well, it's going to be the wedding is in September, end of September, so yeah.
Kind of worked out there.
Sorry, you guys are cold. I worked out.
We're actually.
I'm from President.
No regular internet.
I got to see you play which was a guy taking all of Frankenstein, including the record, and cast the show, and all of the people who
Oh, really?
So, I remember that way, and then basically,
it's like I'll go play basketball, everything's fine, and no one realized that I'm slipped in, I didn't care,
so like, early on, several of the related ones,
I recommend that we're only doing this just about how much time
yeah, but it's good.
ends up leading to osteoarthritis.
Yeah, I mean,
Try to.
yeah, it's all, Lord Byron with the show. Because they're pretty much like guaranteed, like just the way I am. say just stop.
Yeah.
I don't even play the hardcore, even some of the
Yeah. It's crazy, man, at age 19, you know, it's how often that story is. 19-year-old, yeah.
Not like.
When it was first published,
What's the?
I'm hoping it's
under
next
a
time.
pseudonym or
10 or 15 years, I'm banking on it.
And so they like,
When
they
you look at
basically
the
just
chapter, if I'm
really chauvinistic.
Yeah,
Even though she's just a little, we'll look past that.
It's actually both ideas.
They just didn't want to do
Left
the
one's
hardcore.
toward, right one's just generated.
Can you imagine writing that down? Well, this author's just
Like, I feel like a parent. I got my right track and I see it.
Yeah.
The type of shoes that you wear as well, makes you, it's got a heel, makes you not a heel. It's really, it's kind of ball to the feet, it actually good door.
Yeah, well, it's how you, I was actually trying to say.
Right, so you go out,
Like, people just like to do
How
like,
radical.
you're hitting the first spot, it's like a train, basically. Nothing around
It was a
there.
very different world.
So when you
Now we're
basically, that way you naturally start going like, you're gonna run it, you like some people like.
That's what I did on the weekend.
You're putting all your,
And her father, like,
Impact goes right, yes, through your heel, right.
And then you have to like manually kind of push back to get that, but supposedly you get in the right spot.
If you try to wear like minimal shoes, well, if you try to run barefoot with those things.
Yeah.
Well, it may not touch it, no, you don't. She start coming down the balls or the
Oh, yeah.
and that's just the impact you have instead of your hand. It's really interesting. About that.
I
I think that's
you
what
can
you
way faster just too, man, because you're naturally springing, like, there's just a natural spring to hit the right spot, so you actually.
Restart.
That's how you're supposed to
Or
reach.
with minimal shoes.
Or those like shows.
You feel right away to your calves or how you're tell that you're using them.
You know the picture I'm talking
Because we thought that too.
it's a picture?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
It's on the front of it. I was talking to the guy who was like,
It's interesting though, because it's kind of related to what I'm going to talk about.
There's
a German-
like opened up.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the Nazis,
That's when they.
the whole thing with the Nazis
Like
was,
this.
well, it's
You wouldn't say sports event, no. I would never who the day after. You wouldn't know how full adrenaline. I mean, it's amazing for him, like, he's had that huge surgery.
Alright, so, up next is, Mr. Stephen Rose.
Stefan Rose.
Thanks, Justin. So, I guess everyone knows me here. It's great seeing everyone this morning. You know, what we're trying to do with the Church of Praxeology, the idea of this organization, is to build a community. We want to build a community around a set of ideas that we think are very important, but unfortunately, the larger society we live in does not share our passion for these ideas. They're either disinterested or openly hostile. And so part of the purpose of these services, what we'll be doing is bringing forth these ideas and elaborating on them, exploring them, so that when we leave from here and go out back into the larger world, we have a good idea, a clear, increasingly clear idea about what it is that we believe and how that makes us different from everyone else. And one thing that I think makes us very different is our understanding of human nature. We believe that a world without coercive government is possible. We believe that humans can govern themselves without creating a state. What does this say about our understanding of human nature? If you take this idea to most people, they dismiss it out of hand. What does that say about their understanding of human nature? So what I'd like to do is to explain why I think most people have a confused understanding of human nature or an inaccurate understanding. And I'll go through that, and then I'll give a couple of historical examples of where this inaccuracy has caused a lot of damage. And then I'll give some examples of where you still see it today, around you today. So what am I talking about? What is the confusion that most people have about human nature and that we don't share? People who believe in liberty do not agree with. The confusion comes about from people not understanding that there are two distinct types of knowledge. You could call it two separate worlds, really. And let me explain what both of them consist of. The first world is the world of inanimate objects, inanimate forces. It's a world that, well, let's say two types of knowledge. This type of knowledge consists of laws that we have discovered about the world. They exist independently of the human mind. So this type of knowledge includes your knowledge of all the hard sciences, things like chemistry, physics, biology. These disciplines have laws that have always existed. I think 1 million years ago, the speed of light through a vacuum was the same as it is today. It's the same as it will be 1 million years from now. Same thing with chemistry, same thing with biology. We discover these laws, and we have no power to change them because they're not mediated by mind. They exist separately from us. That's the first type of knowledge describing one part of the world. The other type of knowledge describing a completely different world is knowledge of the things that are products of the human mind, things that have come out of the human mind, things that have resulted from human volition. And so in this category, you have such disciplines as economics, political philosophy, human culture, and traditions, and religious systems, political systems, the historical processes, the working out of historical processes. These are things that are inherent to the human mind. You can't imagine any of these happening 1 million years ago when humans were not here. There was no economics 1 million years ago. There was no historical process. There was no political philosophy. And in 1 million years, if humans are no longer here, there will not be these disciplines. So these are things that are inherent to the human mind. You cannot objectify them. You can't describe economics in a world with no humans, no mind. So you have these two types of knowledge. And what has happened throughout history is that people have confused them and tried to treat things that are of the human mind as if they're part of the inanimate world. They tried to objectify these disciplines and treat parts of them as if they're objective laws that are discovered, but they're not discovered because they didn't exist. We created them. They came out of the human mind. So I'll give you two examples, historical examples. One comes from economics. Like I said, economics is a product of the human mind. You can't imagine it existing in a world without mind. Economics is a relatively new discipline. It's only a few hundred years old. And when philosophers, proto-economists, first started thinking about the economy, started thinking about commerce, they wanted to find objective laws. They wanted to be economists in the same way physicists are physicists. What's a law we can measure that's repeatable? That's always a rule, that's a hard and fast rule with economics. And one of the big questions in economics is a question of value. Where does value come from? So if I buy this card holder and I pay $10 for it, where did that $10 come from? What is the law? What is the objective law that says this thing is worth $10? And if you imagine this existing independently of the human mind, what's its value? This is what they were struggling with. Now, if you think about it, it's an absurd question because you can't have an inherent value. There is no objective rule that determines value. Value is determined by millions of minds in the marketplace economizing, budgeting, thinking about whether they want this or not. That's what determines if they're going to pay $10 or not for it. And this card holder, a million years ago, it's absurd to talk about its value, but this is what they tried to do. They wanted to objectify it. And so they came up with this theory called the labor theory of value. And what the labor theory of value says is value comes from the amount of labor that is spent making something. So if I spend 10 hours as a blacksmith making this, that's what imputes value to it. And you can make this as an objective rule, in the same way E equals MC squared is an objective law. Value is the amount of labor hours that go into making something. Again, it's an absurd idea if you think about it. I mean, I could spend thousands of hours making something, but if no one wants it, it doesn't have any value. There is no objective law. I could spend virtually no time making something, but it might be very valuable to people. According to the labor theory of value, if I was a monk in the Middle Ages copying a Bible, it might, let's say it takes a month of hard labor to copy that Bible. And a competing monastery 10 miles away builds a printing press, new technology. In that same month, one monk can now produce 100 Bibles. So according to the labor theory of value, we're both committing 1 month of labor. In one case, he's making 1 Bible. In the second case, the other guy's making 100. The labor theory of value says that they're worth the same. The 100 Bibles is worth the same as 1 because they both have the same amount of labor. You see how this is an absurdity. You can't objectify economics. You can't try to treat it like that, but they did. And so the labor theory of value, despite how ridiculous it sounds to us, was actually taken very seriously hundreds of years ago. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which was published in 1776, contains the labor theory of value. And it's still to this day considered a seminal free market book, and it is to a certain extent, but it has this glaring error about where value comes from. And there's a direct line, actually, between Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and the Communist Revolution. Because if you think through the implications of the labor theory of value, what it says is any profit that's made from selling this that's not given to me as the laborer is exploitation. If you hire me, if my boss hires me to make card holders, and I spend 10 hours on each of them, and he pays me $100, and then he sells them for $200, let's just say, and I believe in the labor theory of value, I think I should get the $200, because all value comes from labor. And you see this over and over again in the communist and socialist literature in the late 1800s. The pamphlets, the books, the novels, they all repeat this. The labor movement all repeat this: value comes from labor, and the capitalists are exploiting us. So these ideas matter, and people take them seriously. And the philosophers got it wrong. They mixed these categories of knowledge. And so the natural consequence, if we're being exploited, all value comes from labor, that's what the philosophers told us, then we need to overthrow the capitalist system and usher in this utopia. So, leading to the unbelievable destruction, because they confuse these types of knowledge. So that's one example. The other example doesn't deal with economics, but it deals with history, the historical process. Again, history is a product of the human mind. You can't imagine a historical process existing independently of the mind. But philosophers, a couple hundred years ago, 150 years ago, when they were trying to struggle and understand the historical process, they wanted to come up with these simple laws. They wanted to come up with objective laws that explain the historical process. This is just as absurd as the economic example. The unfolding of history is kind of like the unfolding of our own lives. Each of us has personal characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and so to some extent we're on a trajectory. But to a large extent, it's dependent, the direction our life takes is dependent on the ideas that we have and the choices that we make. See, there's not a hard law. It's mediated by ideas. It can change. You know, if I came to you and said, I've discovered an objective law about where your life is going to be. I know I can tell you where you're going to be at 40, where you're going to be at 50,